he was running orgies in stately homes that required wealthy couples to submit photos of themselves.
Who really runs Britain? What is our equivalent of the deep state? As you know, for many years, I have spoken about the British Civil Service and the completely caustic effect they have on democracy for the United Kingdom. But now Connor Tomlinson, the contributor to Courage Media, co-host of the New Culture Forum's Deprogrammed podcast, has gone in depth after the news that we just saw there that Keir Starmer's Downing Street has now hired Boris Johnson's advisor Munira Mirza, the former communist, to set policy on multiculturalism. As Connor says, Mirza is married to Tory fixer, former sex club entrepreneur Dougie Smith, both of whom made Kemi Badenoch's career. And Connor, you have been researching the tentacles of the British deep state for many years. And what you've discovered is absolutely fascinating, but a lot of it comes down to this couple, Dougie Smith, Munira Mirza, described as probably the most famous couple in Britain, or the most important couple in Britain that no one has really heard of, and the odd connections that they have with the people who really make the decisions in Britain. So what have you found out?
So Munira Mirza, for those who don't know, is the daughter of second-generation Pakistani immigrants who studied at the University of Kent, my former university, and Matt Goodwin's, funnily enough, under Professor Frank Furedi. Frank Furedi ran the Revolutionary Communist Party. He then ran Living Marxism, and Living Marxism, I think it was in 2010, after a libel suit, converted into spiked.com. That's relevant for later. Furedi is also involved in MCC Brussels and the European Conservative, where my friend and deprogrammed co-host Harrison Pitt has worked. Munira Mirza studied under Furedi and learned a lot about Antonio Gramsci, the long march through the institutions progenitor. Well, it was Rudy Dutch that came up with that term, student activist in the US, but the idea that Marxists shouldn't wage a sort of bottom-up class-based revolution, violence in the streets against the proletariat, from the proletariat to the bourgeoisie. Instead, Marxists should infiltrate institutions, turn them Marxist over time, and enforce Marxism top-down. And so when I put in there former communist, I mean that she was a former communist in her politics, but remains a communist in her tactics. And so Mirza left the Revolutionary Communist Party to work initially for Michael Gove at Policy Exchange, crafting the Gove and Cameron takeover of the Tory party and refashioning it in Blair's image, and then became a policy advisor for Boris Johnson when he was London mayor, and then moved eventually into Downing Street when Boris Johnson was elected prime minister. She resigned in 2022 over Boris Johnson's suggestion that Keir Starmer had willfully refused to prosecute Jimmy Savile while director of public prosecutions. That resignation was leaked to a chap called James Forsyth at The Spectator. Now, James Forsyth is married to Allegra Stratton, the former Downing Street press secretary who resigned in disgrace after ITV procured leaked video of her boasting about breaking lockdown rules. James Forsyth was also one of the director of communications, or an advisor, under Rishi Sunak after Liz Truss was cooed out and he was installed in number 10 Downing Street. And he was a longtime editor of The Spectator while Kemi Badenoch worked there. So it's very interesting how all of these leaks all go through one particular person and one particular outlet. Michael Gove, obviously, now being the editor of The Spectator, Gove being a longtime friend to Smith and Mirza. Smith and Mirza have been involved in selecting candidates for the Conservative Party and setting policy for a long time, because Dougie Smith is known as the Conservatives' equivalent of the Wolf from Pulp Fiction. He is a mysterious figure, very few photos of which exist online, who is said to have a hand in Conservative policy and particularly candidate selection, while at the exact same time although he insists that this work had no crossover whatsoever, he was running orgies in stately homes that required wealthy couples to submit photos of themselves before they could attend. There's no suggestion at all that the same people that turned up to these orgies, presumably with photos of them in compromising positions, could be Conservative candidates. Of course, I'm sure Dougie Smith is just consulted because he's an absolute mastermind in policy, from which you can see, because Smith and Merzer's particular policy agenda led the Conservatives to their worst defeat in 100 years. And Smith and Merzer are also...
But Connor, before you just go on, can I just interrupt there to get some clarification? Because folk are going to be absolutely shocked by this. And it's not in a pearl-clutching type of manner. It's because this is the Conservative Party, which is very... probably quite rightly careful about the types of people that it brings on for candidate selection. And you're saying effectively the guy behind this got into politics as a sex party boss. But first, the reason you're watching this show is that you know it's becoming increasingly difficult to trust mainstream media or the so-called fact checkers who claim to determine which facts are true. And come on, we know there's so much good reason for that, given the debate over free speech, the controversy surrounding Brexit, and how Trump and other politicians challenging the status quo are portrayed every day. But I've found the solution. It's called ground news, and it's the best way to stay informed and cut through media bias and narratives so you can get the facts for yourself. Go to ground.news/outspoken to check it out. Let me show you this incredible website and app in action. So I want to look at the recent speech. It was amazing, wasn't it? US Vice President J.D. Vance at the Munich Security Conference, totally tearing into European governments, including ours here in the UK, over the total trampling over of free speech. And you can see clearly in one place that 361 sources are covering this story. Ground News instantly shows how the story is being covered, though, by the media, broken down by whether it leans to the left or the right. This is called the bias distribution service. And if you scroll down, you can actually then see every article about this topic broken down by the political position and ownership of the publication. So in this case, quite clearly, Newsmax, GB News gave fair and accurate coverage on how Vance had finally had the guts to point out these uncomfortable truths to European leaders. But by stark contrast, left-wing publications went the other way. HuffPost claimed the speech left all of Europe aghast, while The Independent decided to go on the fact that Vance had made a joke about Elon Musk. Who cares? What's more, though, is that Ground News gets to know you, providing you with the news stories you're interested in, but also analysing your own biases. So my favourite feature, actually, is their blind spot feed. And it surfaces upwards of 20 stories daily that you might not be hearing about because of the corruption of the mainstream media. Now, from a macro level, I know you love the news, but don't trust the legacy media. So Ground News gives you the tools to understand the truth about what is going on in the world. It's the only way I read the news, allowing you to see through media bias, manipulative narratives, and not relying on the MSM effectively to define the truth for you. So go to ground.news/outspoken to check it out. Subscribe through my link for 40% off the Vantage plan, which is what I use for unlimited access. Ground News is subscriber funded, so supporting my sponsors also supports my work. And for less than a Netflix subscription, you can get all the world's news in one place and think for yourself. This has been a game changer for a news junkie like me. That is ground.news/outspoken. You can click on the link in the description below this video if you're watching on YouTube or Rumble. But now, back to the show.
At the same time he got into politics, I would never, of course, suggest that this had any crossover, Dan. I'll leave other suggestions to Nadine Dorries in her famous book, The Plot, where she revealed, by the way, that the character Dr. No, the enigmatic figure who threatened ex-girlfriends and things like that, was apparently also Dougie Smith. And those are some very outlandish accusations. But I will note that the Dean Dorries has yet to be sued. So I can only assume there's an element of truth to them. People might be questioning, okay, well, what level of influence do they have? Well, first of all, Smith and Merzer introduced Rishi Sunak to his political mentor via Forsyth. Forsyth being the best man at Rishi Sunak's wedding, by the way. So they are credited for getting Rishi Sunak into politics and also, therefore, involved in the political machinations to oust Boris, then oust Liz, and install Sunak. But also in 2022, when Kemi Badenoch decided to make a bid for Tory leader, Michael Gove came out and endorsed Kemi, and his endorsement was reported in The Spectator by one James Forsyth. Very curious how it's linked to Rishi, linked to Munira Mirza, linked to Gove, and linked to Kemi. And the other links to Kemi are particularly interesting because Munira Mirza actually established the Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities, which then produced the Sewell Report, which is the speech that made Kemi Badenoch famous for arguing against critical race theory in the Commons. And in the Conservative Home piece that also made Kemi's career and endeared her to the Conservative Home base, which is why she topped routinely polls of Conservative members as their favourite Conservative cabinet minister. The article was Badenoch visibly conservative. The quote is, "The commission wouldn't have been formed at all, in my view," by the reports, by the piece's author, "had it not been for Munira Mirza, another disruptor targeted by the left. The former head of Downing Street Policy Unit drove the commission's mission, just as Michael Gove had pushed for a full government response to it a year on. The same names keep cropping up as having pushed Badenoch to the top, though I do wonder if said same names pulling the strings of the Tory party are currently regretting the fact that Badenoch has driven the Tories down to terminal decline in the polls."
I know it has been utterly a disastrous decision, which I knew it would be. So the point is, why were they pushing her so hard? I guess what all of this doesn't explain, though, Connor, is why on earth Labour would want to get involved with this dirty, sort of dodgy and incestuous type approach to the deep state. What do they think Munira Mirza and presumably by connection Dougie Smith can offer them?
I'm not necessarily sure, though I will point out that Nadine Dorries and her various sources in the plot says that this small group have been friends with Sue Gray for quite some time, including Michael Gove. People might be confused as to why a Labour Party mandarin who was appointed the head of the Partygate investigation and then moved to Keir Starmer's chief of staff is friends with the people that can, well, have an influence over Conservative candidate selection and policy. And it's because they're two cheeks of the same backside. They're the uniparty. And so what they're trying to do is fashion both Labour and Conservatives into a Hobson's choice that implement the same policies on the British public who don't want them, no matter who they vote for. And so they craft both parties into enforcing their agenda. The final thing I will say as well is that they are very clever about, let's say, reputation smearing their opponents. I have been assured by people that know Smith and Mirza that they aren't what they seem and they have a secret master plan and they actually want to improve the country. Well, given they've had an outsized amount of power for the last, let's say, decade or so, and the country's been in absolute falling down in its GDP per capita and its social cohesion, I would question the credibility on that front. And questioning it openly does get you smeared by their allies. So myself, Harrison Pitt, Stephen Edgington, Nick Dixon, others have been attacked as racial identitarians, white identitarians, and the far right and the terminally online right, or very online right, in the pages of ta-da, Spiked, the former living Marxism paper of the Revolutionary Communist Party by Inaya Falarin Iman, who used to work for GB News, funnily enough, and actually shared a sofa with me at one point on Mark Dolan's ill-fated show, so she would know I'm not some sort of fascist beast lurking underneath beds. But nevertheless, she decided to smear me right before December. Inaya Iman has invited Mirza to speak routinely at her charity. It's called the Equiano Project. And of course, Spiked being the outlet of choice for Mirza's former Revolutionary Communist Party allies. So it seems that this network have tendrils wrapping around various press outlets like Spectator, like Spiked, and they don't like it when people suggest that Kemi Badenoch may not have been the best horse to back.
Thank you so much for watching Dan Wootton Outspoken. Please click on my face just to the bottom left to subscribe to this brand new independent news source and turn on the notification bell so you'll be alerted to our brand new live shows, uncancelled interviews, and special royal episodes. Outspoken is also now available as a podcast, so you can listen to the show every weekday on the go, wherever you are.